A lot of people give Rico the credit with destroying the mob. I think it was a part of it, but I think the mob destroyed itself too. The way it changed over the years, people weren't really practicing the rules of La Cosa Nostra. There was too much greed. There were too many people killing people without a sanctioned hit, without permission. And things got out of control. And like the Colombo War really destroyed the Colombo family.
You know, I agree with you to an extent, but you know, a lot of people I've heard.
I walk in redemption.
Hey everyone, welcome to another Sit Down with Michael Franzese. Hope everybody is doing well. All is very good, very blessed on this end. As always, I give God all the praise, honor, glory, and thanksgiving for that. Pretty soon coming up, I am posting a video of a sit down I had with David Berkowitz, son of Sam. If you were around in the 70s and 80s and even beyond that, it was a major case. Not going to get into the details of it now. Most of you watching this probably heard of David Berkowitz and the son of Sam. It was a reign of terror, I would say, in Brooklyn, Queens, and parts of New York. But I sat down with him in prison for a couple of hours. And a lot came out, and I want to make this clear. You know, David is going to spend the rest of his life in prison. He doesn't make excuses for what he did. But, you know, the mental health issue is in the forefront today, I would say. And I think through David and through the interview, you're going to understand some things, not make excuses for them. I'm not saying that, but you're going to understand how serious mental health issues are. Many of you know that. But it's really in the forefront now. So I hope you enjoy the interview. It'll be coming up. We'll be promoting it a little bit. Probably another week or so you'll get to see it. But it's going to be something special. Trust me on that. So today I have a very special guest. His name is Bill Courtney. He was a NYPD detective for about 25 years. He started in the mid-'80s, went 25 years onto that, worked with the feds, did have some involvement with organized crime, worked with the cartels, knows all about the city of New York, has some great stories. It's amazing that I'm sitting down with people from law enforcement. You know, who would have thought, 25 years ago, and Bill, I'm sure, feels the same way, that we would be sitting down like this and conversing and talking about things that we might have had in common. Even though he was a cop, I was on the street. You know, sometimes there are similarities between those organizations, the NYPD and things that happen with us on the streets. Pretty amazing. But he's an amazing guy, got some good stories. So without any further hesitation, my guest, Bill Courtney. Well, Bill, I never thought that, who would have thought all these years later I'd be inviting a former NYPD officer and organized crime, you're on that force also, into my studio to sit down and talk about old times, new times. And by the way, you're surrounded by mob stuff. You got all the actors behind you. You got all the real guys on this side, and then everything. So you're surrounded by the mob in here.
Yeah.
Feel safe?
Yeah, I'm on your turf. I'm going to have to trust that I'm going to make it out of here.
You will make it out of here, I guarantee it. Well, my wife will have something to say about that. But anyway, great to have you here.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Well, it's 25 years on the force, right? I'm sure you have a million stories.
Absolutely.
You got involved, investigative-wise, with some of the guys that I knew back in the day. And now you're out of that life, obviously. And you have a great YouTube platform that you just started.
Yeah.
It's called The Proffer.
It's called The Proffer, yeah. It's doing pretty well for, only been up like 3 months, but we're doing pretty good.
And I heard you had Gene Borello on.
Gene Borello was on, and once I had Gene on, I exploded. It was off the charts. He has some great stories, and it was a lot of fun to do.
See, that's for all you YouTubers out there. Get Gene Borello on, and you're gonna blow up in a good way.
That's right.
So it's good. No, he's a charismatic guy, to say the least, and people are interested in what he has to say. He's got a good delivery too.
His life was a crime in progress from morning to night. He's very truthful about it, and he recognizes the downside to it, and he doesn't have to worry now. He lives a pretty good life. So.
Yeah, I recently spoke with him, and he doesn't have a filter. What's in his head comes right out of his mouth.
That's right.
He doesn't have time to make anything. It just comes right out. So he's being really truthful. And it's funny because Mike Tyson is a friend, and Gene told me that Mike Tyson, one of his idols, he'd want to meet him. And Mike has the same thing. What's here comes right out.
Yeah, absolutely.
Honest.
And what's funny is at one time in my career, when I was looking into different schemes and acts of violence in the music industry, a lot of the players grew up with Mike Tyson. And so over the years, you know, Mike never forgot where he came from. And when these guys would get jammed up or whatever, Mike would, you know, try to help them out. And some of his best friends, or guys that, you know, were tough street guys who, you know, wanted to hang out with Mike or came across my radar, whether or not, you know, it was homicide investigators or not. And I think Mike's a real lucky guy in a lot of ways to have, you know, he's had a real tough life, but to get out of that neighborhood like Bed-Stuy and Brownsville and to make it where he's at and watch him go through this transformation to who he is today is a really good thing to see because he really had it tough.
Absolutely. No, it's real and it's sincere. And, you know, he'll tell you if it wasn't for Customato finding him, that he'd either be dead or the rest of his life in prison, one of the two.
Yeah.
And he's very grateful and very thankful for that. He loves Cuss. You bring up his name and tears come in his eyes. You know, I love that.
Yeah, I think that they both needed each other, and it was a very, you know, it was such a long shot that they would find each other, and he would have such a great student, and he'd be able to pass on all this knowledge. And what a great story.
You know? Yeah, you know, I believe that if Cuss didn't pass away, Mike would have retired undefeated. He was that great.
I think you're right.
Right.
Yeah, he went down the wrong road after that. Gus was like a father figure, everything to him. Yeah. Believed in him, you know.
You know, he said to me, you know, we had a conversation, and he said the best time of his life was when he was in prison. Yeah, and he meant it. He said, Michael, I'm all by myself. He said, I didn't have to put any air, I didn't have to worry about people around me. He said it was peace.
Yeah, and it's controlled.
Yeah.
You get up, you know what you have to do, and you don't have to worry about people looking to get money from you or all that stuff that's out on the street or the problems that come with having too much money.
And even now, you know, when you're around him, he's got so many people pulling at him, even till today. You know, but he's in great shape. He's got a great wife. You know, Kiki's a wonderful person, so he's doing well.
You know, a couple of years ago, I just had a young woman on my show named Kindy O'Reilly, and her father was a famous street guy named Ken Do Riley, and I arrested him and his mom, her mom, on a major drug case, and they were both sentenced to life in prison. And this poor girl, at the age of about 2, maybe she just turned 3, was orphaned by it. She became an activist. She got her parents out of jail, but during the process, some street guys from Brownsville who we had I guess some mutual respect for each other. They were like gentlemen gangsters. Reached out to me and said, Mike Tyson's going to fund money to help get this guy an attorney to get him out. And I don't think they were really good friends or anything like that, but Mike recognizes people in trouble. He's been there, and he is very generous with money in that respect to try to help somebody who really did enough time. And the whole thing worked out well. The system corrected themselves, and some of those minimum mandatory sentencing guidelines were kind of unfair. And you know, they destroyed people's lives that really, they should have done a 20-year bid or something like that, you know. So it worked out really well. And so I'd love to talk to Mike one day because I ran across so many of these guys over the years, and I'd love to get his take on it. But
the interesting conversation, trust me. You know, I got to say this, Bill. Your time was really from the mid-'80s you started?
Yeah, early 80s I came on, did my uniform time and all that, and then the early 90s is when I was involved in like different robbery squads, central robbery squads, so doing a kind of lot of, you know, pattern robberies and things like that, stick-ups. And
How do you see the way things were in your time on the force compared to what's happening now?
You know, it's insane. I mean, you know, the digital world has put police officers in such danger. You know, every move they make, they're being watched. They're being treated really unfairly in that they can't do their job. People are constantly poking at them, trying to get a rise out of them, trying to make fools of them. And the government puts up with it. You know, back in the day, we were appreciated. It was more violent. It was a much more dangerous world in some ways. You know, New York had about close to 2,300 homicides in 1991. This year, New York will get maybe 700, something like that. So, but we have a less violent world now because a lot of the crime is digital. They found less violent ways to commit crime, but now it's the quality of life out on the street, where your mother can't walk to a grocery store without being accosted. Mentally ill people roam the streets of New York and push people in front of subway trains, and the cops' hands are tied. They're working with, corrupt district attorney's office, corrupt at the top, and they won't prosecute quality of life crimes or crimes that affect small business owners and things like that. In our day, too, the bad guys and the good guys hate. They looked at each other, they stared each other down. Nowadays, it's all the crime seems to be underground, and I couldn't survive today if I had to utilize all the different technologies that's out there, and organized crime couldn't exist in the way it did with all the digital, plate readers, cameras, cell phones. But I would go back to that era in a second.
Well, let me ask you this, what would have happened to anybody that assaulted a cop back then?
Yeah, I tell you what, it was more violent back then. People resisted arrest more. You can look at mugshots and maybe like 20% of them, the guy had the turban wrapped up in his head, black eyes. So there was a lot of violence back and forth, but it was an accepted practice of the way it was. You're going to resist arrest. We're going to, maybe beat you into submission, and that's just the way it is. Well, no, and people didn't sue like they do now. Now, if you yell at somebody, it's such a litigious society that they're after you. So, but bad guys took their lumps. It was a different world. It did change. We started to become aware that we need to keep our tempers in check as time went on and things like that. But we didn't live under the fear that I think these cops today live.
What do you think's in the head of these prosecutors now that don't want to prosecute? Because I always say this, Bill, look, I was a criminal, and if on the street, I'll make up a name, if Rudy Giuliani would have came to me and said, hey, don't worry about it, if we indict you under the RICO statute, we're going to give you bail, and you're not going to get that much time, we're going to go easy on you, it's not a problem. I wouldn't have reformed at that point. I would have been a worse criminal. That's just the mentality of guys like that are into crime. How do these people think that going easy and going light is going to create a safer neighborhood, a safer community? What's in their heads?
Yeah, well, I did a lot of cases with the Eastern District over the years, and I always found that when you were doing a proffer, if anyone mentioned a wise guy or a New York City cop, they perked up, they wanted to write everything down. And they gave themselves away. As far as local crime goes, there is only one possible explanation why a district attorney will not prosecute or ask for bail for the types of crimes that really affect small business owners. These serial robberies of stores where they smash in the cabinets, running out. They just seem to say that, we're just not going to prosecute it. It's not really a violent crime. There could only be one reason for this, and that is that these district attorneys are corrupt. They're bribed by big left-wing money, and they're hell-bent on destroying our society. There could be no other reason. No other reason.
Well, thank you, Bill, because I've tried so often to play this out in my head. It's the only conclusion I can come to also. Right. They want to destroy our communities, our society. Yeah. I don't know. I can't process it in any way. But let's go back.
Right.
What's your, you involved with any of my former friends?
Well, I tell you,
you just said you worked with the Eastern District.
I work with the Eastern District. My last case was a death penalty RICO case in 2006, I think it was. My other cases would have been continuing criminal enterprises, and I was in a Colombian group with the DEA. So we did a lot with the Southern and the Eastern and the Special Narcotics Court. So I had a great career. I was really fortunate. And, but yeah, the U.S. attorneys are a different breed. Very sharp guys, they're smart. They have all the tools and all the money to do whatever they want to you. And it's great working on that side, because when you do all your cases in state court over the years and district attorney's office, their offices are in shambles. They have no budget. You can't protect anybody. But you go over there and it's, yeah, the courtrooms, their office space, everything is just, amazing. So when I made that transition to start doing federal cases, I was amazed at the power I wielded too, being sworn in, deputized as a federal agent with DEA or FBI. And, one case, we had one guy absconded and we were trying to find him. His mother and his wife lied to us when we were looking for him, so we arrested them for lying to us. And it was basically, look, we have your mother and we have your sister, turn yourself in or whatever. Now, and now if that happened to me, I would be outraged. But that was one of the many tools that you had to really make people's lives miserable if you were trying to flip them or find them or whatever. So it's a whole different set of rules at that level. A lot of people give RICO the credit with destroying the mob, but I think it was a part of it. But I think the mob destroyed itself too. The way it changed over the years, people weren't really practicing the rules of La Cosa Nostra. There was too much greed. There were too many people, killing people without a sanctioned hit, without permission, and things got out of control. And like the Colombo War really destroyed the Colombo family. Yeah, things changed over the years, and we all everyone loves cop movies and mob movies. The action, the old school guys. You couldn't make a movie like that today, like a Goodfellas or so.
I agree with you to an extent, but a lot of people I've heard throughout my time here that John Gotti destroyed the mob. He was so high profile, and he brought so much heat. Right. And I said, that's not true. There were a lot of high-profile guys. I mean, Joe Colombo was high-profile. He didn't destroy the mob. Didn't do it much good afterwards, because the FBI got a little bit more intense on people when we were walking those lines.
Right.
And Gotti obviously brought heat because he was flashy, but they didn't destroy the life.
Right.
And I thought RICO had so much to do with it because guys just didn't want to do the time.
Yeah.
It was one thing, Bill, when they said, hey, you're going to get 10 years, 15 years, you got parole, not a big deal. But under the RICO statute, and then what they were able to do, as they can indict you for murder now as a federal crime, as one of the predicate acts or one of the charges in a RICO case, where they couldn't do that before. It was only state murder. Right. And guys just forget it. They said, hey, you either join us or we're going to put you away for 100 years.
Yeah, and just being a made guy, or even an associate, you've stepped into a conspiracy immediately. And then, you're a small player on it, but, let's say you're a policy guy, but you're still under the umbrella of this organized crime family, you're still going to get the RICO charges at different levels. If it was a state case, you get 5 years. At the RICO level, God knows what you'd get.
No, and you made a point. I'll bring up something that Gene said. He said, look, he did a lot of work for the family, and I believe he did. And then he goes to jail, and they don't even want to buy him a lawyer. They don't want to get him a lawyer.
Right.
So in his mind, he's saying, what, are you kidding me? I did all this work. You don't even want me to now fend for myself.
Yeah.
So to your point, I think a lot of that went on, where people didn't have each other's backs at that point.
Yeah.
And, what organization is going to survive under circumstances like that?
Yeah. And, I think, in the Mafia, when you get called to a meeting somewhere, you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know who you pissed off. You don't know if someone mistakenly thought that you were, maybe skimming, not kicking up, or whatever it is. And, I talked to Greg Scarpa Jr. recently, and he had mentioned 2 different people that had been killed who weren't guilty of what they thought they were. And so, living that life with that kind of paranoia has to take a toll on you. And I think over the years, if they weren't going to follow the rules of La Cosa Nostra, then you were going to have these kind of problems, and you were going to have renegade guys.
And and I'm wondering, when I got straightened out in '75, there had been, you probably aware of this, the books were closed from the mid-'50s right up through the '70s, so they weren't bringing in a lot of guys. If somebody died in their family, they could bring another guy in. But then when the books opened, they brought a lot of guys in. maybe not all the right guys came in, or just standards loosened up. I can only talk through my era. I don't know how tough things were before that, but you certainly didn't have a lot of informants.
Yeah. No. It's. I wanted to bring up when I spoke with Greg Scarpa, he was talking about the first time he met Joe Colombo. He was like about 16 years old. Mm-hmm. His dad realized that he was going to be his dad realized he was going to be a street guy. He wasn't doing well in school, was hanging out with the wrong guys. So he brought him around the club to meet Joe Colombo. And he says he sees them crossing the street. They had fedoras on. They were dressed, to the nines. And Joe and his dad got into an argument after he stuffed $500 in Greg Jr.'s pocket. He was like, no, I don't want him to have it. And he basically said, I'm the boss. He's going to keep it. And of course, that's the way it went. But we talked about Joe Colombo, and he really was an extraordinary, man. And I had the opportunity years ago to meet his son, Chris Colombo. We lived in the same town, upstate New York. A retired state trooper I was friendly with, who used to do policy cases, had apparently arrested him a few times. He said, hey, I'm going over to Chris Colombo's house. You want to meet him? We're all retired. Who cares? So Chris Colombo told me, I think Chris has the greatest arrest story in the history of organized crime. And it goes a little something like this. It's about 7:30 in the morning. He's making his coffee. He's looking out the back window. He has this huge piece of property. And he sees his gardener running, throwing his rake down and taking off running as fast as he can. And he's like, what's going on here? He says, the next thing you know, this helicopter comes over the horizon. The helicopter has tiger teeth painted on the front, and there's 3 FBI agents on each side, and it comes in for a landing. He says it was so surreal and so crazy, he didn't know what to make of it. And then he finally says, oh, God, I got to go and hide stuff. I got to do whatever. And I thought, that is definitely the greatest.
Well, I know Chris well. I can imagine him telling that story.
Yes.
He's very expressive, like that, yeah.
I shouldn't have said it. I should hopefully meet Chris and let him tell it.
No, it's okay. He'll say it again. But yeah, and I'm glad you feel that way. I love Joey. He was kind of a mentor to me when my dad went away, and I was very active in the league at that time and all of that. But yeah, Joey carried himself well, class, dignified guy. Yeah. Commanded respect. I don't know. When I look at, I don't know how things are going on today. I really don't. I don't have my ear to the wall that much. But back then, there was some guys that, my dad carried himself with class, when he was on the street. Joe Colombo.
He had a presence, right?
Yeah, he had a presence. He was charismatic and, he commanded respect when he walked in the room. I mean, everybody knew what he was capable of, but the respect was more, I watched the way he treated people.
Right.
And they were drawn to him, And the same with Joe Colombo. And Persico to a degree. He was a little bit more of a, tougher veneer, I would say. But it was just different, It was different back then.
Well, I tell you, too, I think, there's a lot of similarities between NYPD detectives and mobsters, and I'll tell you why. So if you're a cop and you want to become a detective, you have to go into a specialized unit, street crime unit, things. And I'm talking about back in my day, or our day, let's just say. And once you get picked up by, you finally become a detective, you get your shield, you're a 3rd grade detective. So you go from a street guy to a detective. Now, your entry level is at the bottom, a 3rd grade detective. You're in competition with, let's say, 7,000 other guys to get to the next level of 2nd grade detective. And from there, you're in competition with, let's say, 1,000 guys to get up to 1st. So you're trying to make the best cases, trying to be an earner, whatever it is, and make your way to the top. And then out on the street, you're casing a joint, we're doing surveillance on you, different things. And it's a lot of long hours. Some cops are family men. Some cops are out partying all night long, and a lot of similarities. Of course, we didn't have to worry about going to jail for the most part and things like that. Both dangerous lives, but there's a lot of similarities. And that's what I learned over the years from proffering a lot of people is we all love our families, we love our kids, we all want the best for them, and that's the common ground. And not everybody who ends up in a proffer is a bad person. There's certain things that go on in life that set the stage for where we're going to go. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect. And there's a lot of people that come into those rooms to get deals that never should have got them. So, yeah, the system isn't fair. So
I know that, Bill. But you know, I always say, until you walk in someone's shoes, you know, it's easy to look in the, you know, from the outside looking in and making comments and everything, but you don't know, you know.
yeah.
You don't know. But hey, you know, I got to ask you this: what's the best story you have? Yeah. Well, let me go with this first. Were you under a lot of stress all the time when you were out on the street? I mean, did you feel it? Because I've heard so many stories about police officers that their home life gets ruined because they're out on the street, whether they're pounding a beat or doing detective work, or, you know, there's danger around you all the time. It's very stressful. Did it impact you? Did you see a lot of that?
Yeah, you know, when I first came on, I trusted the old guys I worked with. I thought I was invincible and nothing bad could happen to me. However, as soon as you get into that tussle and you're by yourself, let's just say, whatever, you realize you might be fighting for your life. You know, your heart's pounding. Each second feels like a half hour waiting for the troops to come to help you out, or whatever it is. Then you go, you know, as you progress through your career, maybe you get into like a robbery squad and you're doing a stakeout on some really bad guys and it goes bad. Or, you know, the streets of New York in the 90s was so dangerous. Even for a citizen, they were dangerous, much less the guys who were out looking for bad guys, who were dangerous, violent, and would do anything not to have the handcuffs put on, whether it's shoot at you, shoot you. So, yeah, you know, driving into the precinct, the unit, whatever, I just start to feel that heart kind of starting to pound, like, what's tonight going to be like? And then on the nights I was kind of a little bit at ease. Whatever happens is going to happen, but there is a great amount of stress when you're working in a proactive unit where you know you're going to be involved in something that night for the most part. You know, so yeah.
And you know, we do see stories where it really had an impact on family life.
Yeah.
You know, what I always say all the time is the reason, more than anything else, the reason the Mafia, Cosa Nostra, is a bad life because families get destroyed.
Yeah.
And in my own family, destroyed. Mother 33 years without a husband, brother a drug addict, sister dies of drugs, the younger sister dies, not emotionally stable. And you can write the same story for so many of the other families involved in that life. So if any lifestyle is doing that to a family, it's no good.
Yeah. And I tell you too, with another similarity between the NYPD and the five families is sometimes you have good bosses, sometimes you have bad bosses. And the politics is just, it's so powerful, and if you get into it and you think about it too much, it'll destroy you. You know, especially with promotions and different things, and if you let stuff eat at you, it'll eat at you.
And let me ask you this, let's say one cop sees another cop doing something wrong. What, he tells on him. That's a no-no, right?
Yeah, no, you know, years ago, if you messed around at a precinct level, if you did something that people were slighted by, they felt was breaking the rules, they'd throw your locker out the back window. So your locker would get launched out, let's say a 3-story window into the parking lot. You know, yeah, and you know, you got to get on the radio and call for help. So you want people to come, you know. Now, I don't know too many people that wouldn't go, but you have to realize that if just certain crazy people get involved in all these industries, and so some people are just, you know, they're going to the sergeant, telling on guys, or doing whatever. There's always that one or two people, but when you work in a real dangerous precinct, that stuff doesn't happen as much because you really count on each other, you know. So, but yeah, there are pitfalls like that, and I'm sure in La Cosa Nostra, you know, there's always somebody trying to put down the other guy to boost himself up, and
had a lot of that, you know, a lot of treachery in the life, and yeah, you have to say it, you know, it's just, you know, you say, well, it's the street life, and you expect that, and yeah, you do, but you know what? Other than the fact that people get killed in my life, corporate America is a backstabbing world, government backstabbing world. Yeah. I think it's part of human nature. I really mean it.
Well, I tell you, my first arrest was the funniest thing that ever happened to me. It was a crazy situation. It's brand new. Times Square, the corner of 42nd Street and 8th Avenue, probably the most dangerous corner in the world.
Yes.
Just a crazy place, but all sorts of stuff, from prostitution to scammers to robbers, you name it was out there. So this old timer says, "You want coffee?" I says, "I don't drink coffee." I'm still a kid, I'm 20 years old. So he goes, "Don't touch that radio. I'm going across the street. I'll be right back." So there's like a diner or whatever it was. With that, as soon as he walks in that diner, I hear these screams. I run around the corner, and there's like a 6'4" transvestite stabbing a guy in the hands with a knife, and he's backing up. And as soon as the transvestite sees me, takes off running, and I take off running. I'm yelling nothing into the radio. Nothing makes sense. I'm young. I don't know what I'm excited. And I run into a bar, and it's a transvestite bar. So I'm looking around, all transvestites drinking. They're looking at me, and then I see one in the corner huffing and puffing. Like, well, there's my guy. So I go to arrest him, and everybody turns on me. So I said, "Please, Lord, don't let this happen to me. Don't make me the guy that gets my first day out there. I get beat up in a transvestite bar." This is, So out of nowhere, an older black gentleman steps out and parts way and says, starts pulling for me to get out of the situation. And with that, the door gets kicked open. The boys have arrived, wigs are flying, whatever, and we're extracted. Turns out, so it was a crazy situation, but it turns out that the older gentleman was Emil Griffin, the boxer.
Oh, really? Yeah.
And
He was in that bar?
He was in that bar. And Emil basically saved me from the beatdown or whatever the hell was going to happen, because I had no idea where I was. And if you remember, he beat a man to death in the ring.
Yeah, I remember that. Yeah.
So
now, were you in uniform?
In uniform, yeah. I was a rookie. And so I was like, well, I got an attempted murder, assault, all this stuff. This old timer grabs me and says, "I told you not to go anywhere. I told you to stay off the radio. And what do you have now? No one's going to prosecute this case. That guy who got his hand stabbed up didn't pay the transvestite for his services. He's not showing up. You got nothing." So next time, you just walk around the corner and that's it. Don't. So I got schooled, but I had fun. And it was a crazy situation for a 21-year-old kid to be involved in. So that set the stage for years of insanity. And
that's really interesting, to know when nothing's going to come of this, so just leave it alone.
Right.
Yeah, because the witness is not going to show up, so what do you have? Yeah.
Everyone would be appalled seeing that in public.
Yeah.
But, a wise old police officer like, this is just nothing. This is...
All right, well, let me ask you, that was a dangerous situation, could have been. What was the most dangerous situation you were ever in?
Well, I guess one situation where we had a house staked out for he was a, what would you call him? He was a domestic terrorist who was doing a number of robberies. We had him identified for a string of robberies, and we were waiting outside of his house. And when we went to apprehend him, we turned around. There's a code where we used to always say, "Police don't move." So if you're an undercover cop, you wouldn't spin around with your gun. So if you hear the words, "Police don't move," it's a friendly behind you. So we always said, "Police don't move." And one of my partners said, "Police don't move." And this guy said, "No, you don't move," turned around and opened fire. And so next thing you know, one of my partners is hit in the head, throw him in the car, and take off, rush him to the hospital. So it was kind of things like that we had about 6 guys out there. It never should have happened. We knew it was dangerous, but we didn't think that one guy is going to want to shoot it out with 6 guys. So you never know what's going to happen on any given day. And yeah, I mean, there's things like that though all the time in the 90s when it was just such a violent, crazy city. I mean, I was basically raised in Manhattan, and you were accosted every block. There was somebody looking for money, somebody, So New York was a crazy place back then.
Yeah, that's, I remember it back in the 70s before they cleaned up Times Square, and it was smut city there, and like you said, the craziest things could happen at any given moment, not a given day. There was always something crazy going on there. And then they cleaned it up, and I thought, Giuliani did a great job as mayor in New York. He did well for the city. Yeah. And I wasn't around during the 90s. I was in prison most of the time, and I had moved out here. And then the city seemed to get really nice. I mean, it became a really nice place, less violent.
Right.
And now it's kind of reversed itself again. It's gone back.
Well, Guys in the Life and New York City cops share another thing, and that is their disdain for Rudy Giuliani, because he gave us terrible contracts. Everything the cops did for him, he refused to pay.
But he was supportive of the police, but he gave you bad contracts.
He was supportive of the police, absolutely. He wanted to clean up the city. Without him, it probably never would have happened. But he did not want to pay us for our services, so we were quite upset with him. You know?
Well, I can understand that.
Yeah.
So what's the funniest moments you might have had during that time?
You know, well, the biggest case, I worked in a DEA task force. My partner, Tony, started a case where we went up on 4 cell phones. They were Chicago phones being operated in New York by former members of the Mexican military. And they did not know how to deal drugs. So they're waiting for huge loads of cocaine to come across the border and distribute them. So the first call we get is, hey, where you at? We have 4 phones basically talking to each other. So we have all these different translators and different pods, and this pod's calling that pod. And it's this crazy situation. And the leader says to one gentleman, where are you? He goes, you know, I'm in the place. He goes, what place? He goes, you know, the place. He goes, no, what place? He goes, and he goes to give the address, and the guy stops. He goes, wait, I know where we're at. Never, ever give that address out on the phone or whatever it was. So he goes, oh, you know, sorry, whatever. He goes, I know where you're at. So anyway, they have a conversation. I hang up. With that, the guy picks up the phone and orders a pizza to the location. So we go there, and these Mexican military guys are supposed to pass off something like 150 kilos to these Colombians. So they don't know how to do a drug deal. And when you do a drug deal like that, you use a minivan, you put the keys in the ashtray, you walk out, and you tell the guy, car's around the corner, they take it, and then the money is exchanged later on. It's the way they do business. These guys refused to leave the keys. They said, I think these Colombians are trying to rip us off. My partner jumps in a marked police car. He tells them, chase these guys away real quick. So he chases the Colombians away. The Mexican guys agreed to leave the keys, and with that, my partner jumps in and steals the car loaded with 150 kilos. Now we're listening to the phones. The Colombians and the Mexicans now want to kill each other because they think the other has done something. Anyway, so we figure that's the end of the wiretap. They're not going to talk anymore. No. The next day they make a deal to do about 300 kilos and park it in the Queens Mall on Queens Boulevard in like the 60s over in Woodhaven. So they let that deal go down. We follow the car up to Harlem, and we grab the drugs there, and we put out a fake press release that said that an investigation into Dominican organized crime netted this load. So now they still think they're safe. Anyway, they said, don't worry, Bugs Bunny's coming to visit us on Saturday. Long story short, a tractor trailer comes up, they meet this driver, we pull up the vent of the trailer, and it's loaded with carrots. We ended up grabbing close to 1,700 kilos in the back of that. Now to make the case, I mean, drugs are drugs. People don't realize how much 2,000 plus kilos are in street value and everything else. But turns out that the load was orchestrated by the governor of Quintana Roo, Mexico. He fled to Belize, I guess about, maybe 7-8 years ago. I got a call from the Southern District. They finally extradited him after like 10 years or something like that, and we were going to have to testify. And at the last minute, there was a plea. And what's funny is all those guys, we're talking, I think we got $1 million in cash, close to 2,500 kilos in a matter of a week. Those guys only got 10 years in jail. They had no criminal records, whatever it is. Now, if you were a predicate felon and you get caught with a kilo of crack, you're probably doing 25, 30 years back then. So it's just a strange way of how these things,
Okay, so you had Colombians and you had the Mexicans.
Yeah.
Did you ever have a case against Cosa Nostra with drugs? Or will you ever have a big investigation with Cosa Nostra?
The only thing I ever came across in those days with Cosa Nostra with drugs is, well, one, we had the Gus Faraci case. It was not my team, obviously, but he was murdered. Everett Hatcher was murdered, an undercover DEA agent. So DEA really went after organized crime after that. I ended up with some silly cases, in-house marijuana grows and things like that, because marijuana was so expensive back then. So if you grew the hydro, it was worth a lot of money, low prison sentence.
Right. But we weren't known as big drug dealers to you guys back then, right?
No, I never even thought of it. But there were special groups that, after that murder, that really took a closer look at it. And let's face it, if you're working for an organization and you're one of the low on the totem pole, that's a way to make really good money fast.
Yeah.
And but of course, it brings the organization down.
The reason I say that, because I have said this and people, oh, Michael, that's not true. And they mentioned Vito Genovese and everybody else. We were not allowed to mess with drugs. Right. During my era, we were told if you dealt with drugs, you die.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying guys weren't doing it on the sneak, but you didn't hear things like this would kill us. We just weren't allowed to do it.
No, of all my years in wiretap rooms, I was never aware of a mob wiretap involving drugs.
Right. Well, thank you for that, Bill.
Yeah.
You've
but obviously
you validated me on that.
But I tell you what, too, it's just like I was talking about before. When the U.S. Attorney's Office hears either it's a bad cop or a member of organized crime, if guys knew that there was a small-time mobster doing it, they'd probably hit it because they figured they'll work their way up.
Yeah.
So,
I got it.
But yeah, no, I never was aware of it. I heard about teams doing it, but never. And I don't think they were doing big weight when they were doing it.
No, it was small stuff. Because guys were afraid.
Absolutely.
They couldn't do it. Look, I knew a dear friend of mine who knew all my life, a good soldier, blew his brains out because he, in a phone booth, Tony Orgello, I don't know if you know the name, Tony the Gawk, they called him, but he got involved in a small drug deal, and he was worried. He said, I'm not going to let them walk me into a room. Wow. Yeah, and I took off from Florida, told him, don't worry about it, it's going to be okay, it's a small-time thing, I can cover it. I was just captain at the time. I get off my plane in Florida, I get a call, he went into a phone booth and just scared. He said, they're not going to walk me into a room. Wow. That's how serious it was. Yeah. I couldn't do it. But you just validated that. I'm
absolutely, yeah, not big play. And I think if you look at Paul Castellano's death, a lot of those guys were about to go to trial with drugs.
Absolutely.
And that had to add to the...
Absolutely.
I'm jumping on your side on this one because me and my guys are going to take a hit. So whatever you want to do, I'm down for it.
Absolutely. No doubt about that.
Hey, do you ever remember the name Angelo Prisco?
I do, yeah.
So Angelo was a Genovese guy.
Right.
Jersey, and a bit of back and forth from the Bronx. The reason I bring it up is since I've been out in L.A., I remembered an old case where we had I'll call him corrupt, I guess. I don't know, maybe you've actually heard of him out here. A guy named Bobby DeBrino was a retired NYPD cop who claimed he was a major narcotics detective. Turns out he was cousins with Angelo Prisco. And Prisco was in jail for an arson case, and DeBrino came up with an idea to, right after 9/11, to approach Hollywood insiders and say, hey, let's fly out some stars to do a benefit for the Port Authority cops that died during 9/11. So I know it was at least Drew Barrymore, some other people. They jump on a plane with this guy, who's not a good guy. Just because he's a retired cop does not make him a good guy. Ties to the Genovese family. They fly out and they do this benefit. And while they're at the benefit, DeBrino approaches Governor McGreevy's people and says, hey, listen, we believe in your, it's actually during this campaign, we believe in you, we want to donate money to your campaign. And so shortly thereafter, McGreevy becomes governor. And shortly thereafter, only about 2 years into his sentence, Angelo Prisco gets parole.
Wow.
So I guess about 6 months later, McGreevy steps down. He had all sorts of issues, but the LA sheriffs put DeBrino on a plane and with a subpoena, and shortly thereafter, he stepped down.
No, I haven't heard of that.
So there's all sorts of things out there that, it's just having the utter gall to go do these things.
Yeah.
Just, I would say, oh, don't do that. There's no way they're going to go for this.
Yeah.
And they do.
They did. Yeah. Crazy world. So let me ask you, you got this, what's your goal now on your YouTube platform?
I'm pretty sure I'm not going to be a YouTube millionaire, but I'm having fun. I'm running into, here I am, like in your studio. I mean, it's fun, reliving the past. all the proffers I did, I'm kind of doing them over again.
Yeah.
You know, tell me everything, you know, and
It's amazing how willing people are to talk, huh?
yeah, I mean, and you know, like we had talked about earlier, was that, you know, guys who cooperated have coverage. Guys who were convicted of, you know, big cases can speak to them now. But there's a lot of guys out there that can't. And then I find it interesting, too, the cast of characters that are out here now. People taking shots at each other here and all. Some kind of funny stuff. And it doesn't bother me because I'm on the outside of it. As, you know, a cop looking in, let's just say. So I'm sure I'll fall prey to it soon. But, you know, someone won't like me. But it's really interesting that how this whole thing is taken off.
Yeah.
And I don't know what the demographics are, but like, you know, it's got to be people like men in their 40s and up who are really into the old days. And I still think that I'm fascinated by a lot of this stuff when I look back. And I can't think of a time in history that had such interesting characters, cases, and events from like the 60s up, you know.
Bill, I tell you, you know, I've spoken all over the world, you know, from Singapore to Australia and everywhere in between. And you cannot believe the fascination of Cosa Nostra in all of these countries.
Yeah.
I went to Singapore and I'm speaking in front of like, I don't know, 1,800 people, right? My host comes in and said, you know, we promised a Q&A afterwards. He said, but Singaporeans, they don't ask a lot of questions. They're very polite, very proper. So we'll put a shill in there. We'll ask a few questions, and that'll be it. And I said, okay, great. We'll go home early. I was there for 2 hours.
Wow.
They knew everything. Jimmy Hoffa, John Gotti, asking about Al Capone and just the history of, they knew it all.
Yeah.
There's a tremendous fascination with the life. I don't know how long it'll exist because that era, I always say the golden era of my former life was really late 40s through Lucky Luciano, right up to the mid 80s when things fell apart. But the fascination, it's you can't deny it. There's no question about it. You know, and I tell people, listen, you know, Cosa Nostra in this country survived and prospered and had tremendous control under some tough conditions for over 100 years.
Yeah.
You know, I was talking to an ex-CIA agent, very fascinating conversation. And I told her, she was younger and she spent 10 years in the CIA. I said, you know, you came to us 3 times that I know of.
Wow.
You know, once during World War II when you asked for Lucky Luciano's help.
Right.
Another time you wanted to assassinate Castro in Cuba.
Right.
And I'm going to tell you this, I've heard this my entire life from the right people, that the Kennedy hit was definitely mob related. Wow. No question. And Bill, if I had to take a lie detector test, now I wasn't personally there, but the right people told me absolutely, 100%. And normally the stand-up guys in that life, they're not bragging about what they did. They don't want people to know about it.
Right.
But they told me 100%.
You know, and it's interesting you brought that up, too, because when I was talking to Greg Scarpa Jr., he was talking about his dad being used as a top echelon informant by 100%. The FBI. Well, I should say operative. And he was sent down to, you know, Mississippi during the Mississippi burning era, and actually, I guess, was kidnapping people off the street.
Absolutely
and
true.
Beating the confessions out of them. And you know, it cleared, they found missing activist bodies, they found out who bombed certain churches, really effective. Greg added, though, that the FBI was using some of the information and then going to judges and asking for wiretaps when they already had the inside wiretaps were already there and things like that. Yeah. So he's got some good stories to tell in
well, it's absolutely true because Greg talked about that, and you know, we heard about it, I should say. But I got nervous when I heard what happened with Greg because I was around Greg a lot. Yeah. You know, but fortunately,
and you know, Greg Jr. said that his father's reputation. He said, you know, as this killer, maybe even some people would actually say he was a serial killer. He said really was undeserved, in that his dad really only got violent during the Colombo Wars.
I agree with that. The serial killer in that life was Roy DeMeo. Yeah. And Roy was, I mean, I knew Roy, not really well, but the one major incident I had with Roy is this company, his guys stole 2 of my cars. They were going to chop them up.
Right.
But I knew he was in the business, so I got to him before they were able to chop them up and got the cars back. But Roy would have been a killer whether he was in that life or not. It was just who he was. I mean, he was psychotic.
And then, of course, he hooked up with the Westies.
Yeah.
And talk about 2 groups of people that should not have been around each other. Really vicious guys. And reminds me of a funny story. Jimmy Coonan was the head of the Westies.
I know Jimmy.
And a restaurant owner called the Midtown North Detective Squad and says, hey, some guys are demanding I give them money. He goes, oh, yeah? Who? He goes, Jimmy Coonan. He goes, what should I do? He says, pay him.
Yeah, he was a tough guy, Jimmy.
Those
Those
guys were
Irish
dangerous.
guys, yes, they're tough guys.
But you know what? At the end of the day, they were cokeheads. They were alcoholics. They were out of control. They didn't think about, the days down. And I actually went to high school with Mickey Spillane's sons.
Really?
We all went to St. Agnes High School on 44th Street. And years later, an old cold case came in with their names on it. And I don't know what happened to it. I excused myself from it. But that I'm actually speaking with the author of the Westies, T.J. English, on Saturday. And a great book and an amazing story, and how they married with the DeMeo crew was, and what they did to dispose of bodies was
I know.
kind
Gemini
of gruesome.
Lounge and, yeah, that's tough. Even for us guys, it was tough the way they handled it. But I'll tell you, the Westies were the only outside group that, to my knowledge, we ever worked with.
Yeah.
That there was some trust there, and they were tough guys. Jimmy was a tough guy.
Yeah,
no
and they
doubt.
were pushing back for years, and I guess that Jimmy realized the only way he was going to take control was to get rid of Mickey Spillane and have that alliance with...
yeah, because Mickey was against it. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that was a Gambino connection, right? Was Paul? I think they actually met with Paul, right?
It was Gambino, also Genovese. They did some stuff there. Yeah.
They hated Fat Tony.
Yes.
Because he felt the West Side was his. And then, of course, when they were building the Javits Center, it was really important for all of organized crime to have control of that area, because you would have control of the massive construction project. You'd have control of the unions, particularly the Carpenters Union, that's going to set up and break down every event that comes in there.
Yeah.
So you're talking massive amounts of money. And once you get in those unions, that health and welfare fund is yours. And
Hey,
that's
the power was in those unions. But Bill was great.
Hey, thank you so much for having me. And I'm glad we got to, I'm glad this is probably one sit down I'll make it out without having to worry.
You're going to make it out of this one, no question. But listen, people, and it's an interesting name, the proffer. It really is, because for people that don't know what a proffer is, why don't you let them know?
Yeah, I guess the easiest way I would explain a proffer is and this is from the law enforcement side, is I would say somebody's locked up or somebody's a weak link, and have the U.S. attorney say, look, let's find this guy's lawyer, call him up and see if he'll come in and talk to us. Most times the person is incarcerated already. You bring him in, you give, we used to call it a queen for a day.
Right.
You bring him in, you read them the terms of the proffer, which is, we're going to sit down, we're going to have a discussion. Nothing that you say in this room can be held against you unless you take the stand and say something different than what you told us today. And so we kind of feel each other out, and we could tell them what they're facing, they could tell us what they know, and we can make a decision whether that information is valuable enough for us to give them a cooperation agreement and get them a substantial reduction in their sentencing. And they can decide whether or not it's worth having, putting their family in jeopardy, never really being able to go back home, now having to get into the witness protection program when they do get out of jail, and learning a trade or a means to make money. And so it really is, it's a big decision, and mistakes are made often. The wrong people are given cooperation agreements, and they go right back out and commit crime. I had a guy, I got him a cooperation agreement, and the judge hammered him. Judge Corman hammered him. And then we got him a Rule 35. he gave us additional information. He was given a reduction in that. He gets out of jail and he opened up a heroin mill next to the 44th precinct in the Bronx, right next door, not a block away. So you learn from your mistakes, but that was a big mistake to make. There was a guy he should have done his time.
Well, let's say if you're on the street and you do a proffer, it can get you killed. But now coming on your show, it can get you some nice exposure, so to say, and it'd be good.
And just real quick, the biggest complaint when you cooperate somebody is they're immediately taken to the shoe, and the shoe is always has a steady temperature of about 55 degrees.
I know.
So everyone's freezing their butt up there,
Yes.
and they'll say, "I'll go anywhere, just get me out of here."
I know.
And so.
And that's purposely. They keep it that cold. Trust me. That I know well. I spent 29 months in the shoe. Wow. Yes.
That's crazy.
They would give me the business bill. 29 months. 2 different places, but 29 months.
How do you keep from going crazy?
For me, it was a faith issue. Just really got into my Bible, and my wife sent me in a lot of books. It was probably the best thing that happened to me in my life, right. Because it really started this turnaround for me. I started to see things more clearly, and when I walked away, and we'll end it here. When I walked away from the life, I didn't walk away because I was mad at anybody. I didn't walk away because I wanted to get even with anybody. I didn't walk away because I said, "Oh, you guys didn't treat me right." We all had our differences with one another. I just really wanted to preserve my life and my family's life. Right. And I had such a bullseye on my back. I mean, they were never going to let me go. I had 3 RICO cases. I went to trial 5 times. It was only a matter of time for me. And under the RICO statute, you get convicted, you're dead. That's it. You're spending 30, 40, 50 years in prison. So, it became very clear to me during that whole time that I had to make a real move and get out of this life somehow, some way. But I didn't want to hurt anybody. Right. And when I sat down with the government, look, who John Gleason is?
Yes, of course.
John. Okay, John was the kind of the prosecutor on my case. He wrote a book about Gotti because he prosecuted, and he says in the book how I took the government to the cleaners because I was manipulating. I didn't want to hurt anybody. I didn't want to testify against anybody. I wanted just them to know I'm out of the life. Right. And ended up getting screwed because that's why I spent the whole time. I mean, they were really upset with me afterwards, but at the end of the day, it was all worth it. Because,
And then there's situations where they're going after you because of your dad, just the way they went after Anthony Ruggiano because of Fat Andy. So, yeah.
Exactly. But we survived. So, Bill, it was great. Bless. I appreciate it very much.
Thank you so much, Michael.
Yeah, it was great.
Appreciate it.
Well, there you have it. It's amazing. I told Bill when he came in, if you heard, look what you're surrounded by. You got mob guys from the movies over here. You got, mob guys on the wall over here, and you're sitting with a mob guy. And his podcast, The Proffer, very interesting. He's starting to get some good guests on there. And he certainly knows how to question, or I should say interrogate people. So I would encourage you to tune in. Again, it's called The Proffer, Bill Courtney. Don't mistake him for the coach, Bill Courtney, very famous coach. But he's good. He's very entertaining. You're going to enjoy him. And I think a lot of good information for all you people that love, true crime and all this, street stuff. I think you're going to really enjoy it. So that's it for today. How do I leave it, people? Same way, never going to change. Be safe. Bill will tell you why you need to be safe. Of course, you know that already. Be healthy. Take care of yourself. It's really good. Watch me on Rumble, okay? You're going to hear something different on Rumble. And yes, God bless each and every one of you. And I mean that from my heart. See you next time.